So I'm super excited to teach my favorite lesson of the whole year, trigonometry. So before you do trigonometry, you need to make sure that you have a calculator with the sine, cosine, and tangent buttons. It looks like sin, cos, and tan. So those are the buttons that you need to make sure that you have on your calculator. So if you don't have a calculator, you really need to get one. Also, all the worksheets for the trigonometry unit are underneath day 1. Click Trig Worksheets, and it will actually pull up day 1, day 2, day 3. There's day 3. It'll pull up the word problems that we're going to do, and it's also going to pull up vectors. So for the whole rest of this chapter, those are the worksheets that you'll need. So there is that. Now before we start, I'm going to play a video because I'm going to be referring to that video as I teach. Okay.
Morning, guys. I am so excited because we are finally going to start our unit on trigonometry this morning.
It's called getting triggy with it.
Miles.
Is there a way we can make this more fun or something?
On your mark, ready, set, let's go. Trigonometry, bro, I know you know. I go psycho when I see a triangle. Just can't sit, gotta get tricky with it. That's it, 3 angles, 3 sides. T-R-I-G, all up in my eye. Sohcahtoa.
We'll learn about Sohcahtoa.
Just gotta know about H, A, and O. Everybody looking at a glance at the box. The H, Y,
The hypotenuse.
Theta, theta, is that the eta, eta?
We'll learn about theta.
Look, I don't like it. Besides, you ain't touching this, the O,
The opposite side.
We want you to see. Yo, what's that last side you say? It's gotta be the ABJ.
Adjacent side. And then they have their cute dance.
What? You wanna solve with the trig? Watch your step, you might fall. Trying to work this gate.
This kid right here, super cute.
In the middle of the problem, don't know which
He
one.
does a cute dance.
Gotta know which angles and sides that are missing and given in the problem. They're the guides. You can come with me. All these problems I've tried. Heard it's hard, well then somebody lied. It's
Sohcahtoa helps you to study so you know which one to use. Both sides of way too.
Let's say now you got the HYP and the AJ, then cosine.
Cosine.
But there's one more.
My favorite part. No
That
hypotenuse.
makes it tan.
Getting tricky
So
with it.
no hypotenuse makes it tan.
Getting tricky with it. Getting tricky with it. Getting tricky with it.
Roll with me right now. If you need a side, you gotta know 2 things. Okay, let's ride. You need an angle and one of the
Need an
sides.
angle and one of the
Each is
sides.
Where does X reside?
You see it up high, that's how you know to multiply.
So easy, you
It's
get
up
it on
high,
your own first
multiply.
try. Trig to the maximum, I'll be axing them. How about the one time you gotta use television?
If X is down below,
X
you
and the angle will
divide.
switch, you know.
If X is below, you divide.
It's angle find the time. So let's get it. Trust. The data is the goal.
If you don't know the angle,
calculators will know when I say go.
we'll
Take
do
the numbers and the numbers
inverse.
on the right. Hit it equals and show it off. Now you got it. Get tricky with it.
So that is it.
Get tricky.
I won't make you listen to the whole thing. So anyway, trigonometry. Now we're going to start trigonometry. So all trigonometry means is triangle measurement. So we're going to find measurements of triangles. Okay, so let's first talk about the terminology. So you have to be able to locate the hypotenuse, and hopefully by now you can. The hypotenuse is always the side directly opposite the right angle. That's your hypotenuse. So now we have to be able to locate the opposite side. So you're going to be looking for that angle, and in trigonometry, we represent the angle as theta. So it's a circle with a line through it. It's just a Greek symbol, but we use that to represent the angle. Now when you get to college, they may use beta or some of the other alpha, but we're going to use theta, and that just represents the angle. The opposite side is directly opposite that angle. So there would be theta opposite. Theta, opposite. Theta, opposite. So the hypotenuse is opposite the right angle. The opposite side is opposite the angle. Now I feel like the adjacent side is probably the hardest one to find. The adjacent side is always touching the angle. Also, if you were to draw this angle, it would have to include the adjacent side and the hypotenuse. The opposite side is just that other side. So the adjacent side and the hypotenuse always form the angle. So the adjacent side is always one of the sides of the angle. The other side of the angle would always be the hypotenuse. So the adjacent side, the adjacent side. So you'll have to be able to locate the hypotenuse, the opposite side, and the adjacent side. All right, Sohcahtoa, crazy word. You have to remember how to spell it. So there's lots of ways on the internet to learn, but when I was in high school, they taught us how to spell Sohcahtoa and how to remember it. And I know it sounds awful, but this is the way to remember Sohcahtoa. So I learned in high school, some old hippie caught another hippie tripping on acid. I know that sounds terrible, but I always remember Sohcahtoa. Some old hippie, S-O-H, caught another hippie, C-A-H, tripping on acid, T-O-A. So what that means, S stands for sine. Remember that button on the calculator? Sine. So S stands for sine, and it is always the opposite side over the hypotenuse. O-H, opposite over hypotenuse. C stands for cosine. Cosine is always the adjacent side over the hypotenuse. T stands for tangent. Remember the one that said, no hypotenuse. So no hypotenuse is tangent. That is opposite side over adjacent side. So let's practice. Let's go through making sure that you can find each side. So say I want the sine of angle A. So I would look at angle A and remember sine is some old hippie, opposite over hypotenuse. So sine is opposite over hypotenuse. I start with angle A. The opposite side is that lowercase a, and the hypotenuse is C. So it would just be A over C. What about the cosine of A? So cosine is caught another hippie, C-A-H. Adjacent over hypotenuse. So the adjacent side, remember, is the side always touching that angle, and then the hypotenuse is across from the right angle. So it would be the letter B over C. And tangent is the only one with no hypotenuse. So no hypotenuse makes it tangent. Tangent is toa, opposite over adjacent. So here's my angle. Opposite is little a, adjacent is B. So A over B. So that might be a little bit confusing. Let's try it with numbers. So say I'm looking at this triangle, and I want to find the sine, cosine, and tangents for angle A. So sine of A, cosine of A, tan of A. So it always will tell you which angle you're going to look at. So you have to look for the specific angle. So in this case, I want to look at angle A, which is up here. So remember how to spell Sohcahtoa. Some old hippie caught another hippie tripping on acid. So sine is O and H, which stands for opposite over hypotenuse. So opposite is 7. Hypotenuse is 25. So it's just 7 over 25. Let's try cosine. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So adjacent of angle A would be 24, and the hypotenuse is 25. And then I want tangent. Remember, tangent is toa, no hypotenuse, opposite over adjacent. So the opposite side is 7, the adjacent side is 24. So that's how you do the ratios, the trig ratios. But we're going to have to learn how to solve the problems too. So this is where you need your calculator. So when we very first start trigonometry, I put all this here kind of as a crutch to just help you decide, am I using sine, cosine, or tangent? Eventually, I will take this crutch away, and I'm hoping you could look and say, oh, no hypotenuse, that's tan, and not have to worry about all the rest of it. But to start, we're gonna start really slow and building up to where you can figure out whether it's sine, cosine, or tangent. So at the top of your paper every day, I'll want you to write out Sohcahtoa. Some old hippie caught another hippie tripping on acid. So that's going to help us decide whether we're using sine, cosine, or tangent. Theta, remember, was always the angle. So if I'm looking at this triangle, what's the angle? The angle is 64, so my theta is 64. Okay, so now I have to try to figure out what sides do I have. Well, I see right here that I do not have a hypotenuse, so no hypotenuse, which hopefully will start triggering in your mind that that's tan. So go to your angle to find the opposite side. So the opposite side of the angle is x. That leaves the other side, which is the adjacent side, and that's 7. So I have A and O, which means tan, so I know I have to use tan. So this is how you write the equation. I'm going to put tan, then you always put the angle next to either sine, cosine, or tangent. So since I know it's tan, I'm going to type 64 equals. Now this part's important. I have to put O on top of A. Not A on top of O, it's always O on top of A. So O is X, A is 7. So then, I don't know if you remember from the video, but if it says if X is up high, that's how we know to multiply. So X is up high, we're going to multiply. Here's how you type it in the calculator. Always start on the side by the X. So I'm going to start with the 7. So I'm going to type in 7 times, because X is up high, that's how I know to multiply, tan 64. You don't have to close the parentheses, you can just hit enter. So the length of that side is 14 point, I would round it up to 4. So X equals 14.4. 14.4. Okay, let's try another one. Notice this next one has 2 angles. If there's 2 angles, you can pick. Which one do you want to use for theta? I'll use 23. It really doesn't matter, but I'll pick 23. So again on this one, there's no hypotenuse. What's that trigger that you're going to have to use? I hope you said tan, so I know it's going to be tan 23, because we always put the angle next to either the sine, cosine, or tangent. So no hypotenuse. Okay, so if I'm using 23, what side is opposite that angle? Well, that would be X, which leaves the adjacent side 6. So remember, we have to put O on top of A. Have to. So I've got to put X over 6. X is up high. That means we multiply. Do you remember which button to push first in the calculator? Always start over here by the X, so I start with 6. So 6 times tan 23. 6 times tan 23, and that would be 2.54. So X is 2.5. Okay, let's try another one. Let's go to this one. What's my theta? Well, theta is 35. That's always the angle. This time I do have a hypotenuse. So my hypotenuse is 20. This is my angle, so what's the side directly across from that angle called? It's called the opposite side, so that's X. I do not have an adjacent side, no adjacent side. So I look up here, which one does not have an adjacent side? Well, the only one is sine. Sine does not have an adjacent side, so that's the one I'm going to use. So sine 35, you always put the angle next to sine, cosine, or tangent, equals, I have to put O on top of H. So O is X, H is 20, X is up high, that means we multiply. So I will do 20 times sine 35. 20 times, make sure you click sine this time, sine 35, enter, and it's 11.5. I would round it up. All right, let's try this last one. Let's use the 62 degrees. It doesn't matter which one, I'm picking 62. So 62. So what's the side opposite the right angle called? That's our hypotenuse. So if I'm looking at the 62 degrees, I don't have an opposite. So my adjacent side is 50. So which one is A and H if I look up here? Well, that would be cosine. So cosine 62, always put the angle next to it. And I have to put A on top of H. So A would be 50 and H is X. This time X is on the bottom. So if X is on the bottom, we divide instead of multiply, we divide. So again, you still have to start with the number by the X. So I would type 50 in my calculator first. 50 divided by cosine 62. Make sure you hit cosine 62, and I get 106.5. 106.5. Okay, so that is how you find the side lengths. What if, though, we have to find the angles? Let's see. So, on these, notice we don't have a degrees. We have to find the angles. We can use trigonometry to find the angles too. So this time, theta is just going to be x instead. So on all of these, my theta is x. I'm going to have to find x. Okay, so I still have to figure out whether I'm using sine, cosine, or tangent. So some old hippie caught another hippie tripping on lesson. Okay, so let's see what we have. On this one, I notice there's no hypotenuse. What's it going to be? I hope you remember that's going to be tan, so no hypotenuse. Okay, the side opposite the angle, that's my opposite side, and then the leftover side is my adjacent side. So this time, next to tan, I'm going to put an x because I don't know the angle, so tan x. Now I have to make sure I put O on top of A. So O is 9, A is 3. When you don't know the angle, the button you have to push on the calculator first is the second button. That gives us inverse. So do you see above the sine, cosine, tangent, there's a like tan -1, sine -1, cosine -1. So that's what I'm going to do. Second tan to get that -1. That's called the inverse. I'm going to put 9 over 3. Use that N over D button. Hit enter, and my degrees is 71.6. 71.6 degrees. Okay, let's try another one. This one I do have a hypotenuse. It's 20. This time, though, I do not have an opposite, but I have an adjacent 16. So which one is A and H? Well, that would be cosine. So cos x equals, make sure you put A on top of H, so 16 over 20. If we don't know the angle, what's the first button you push in the calculator? The second button, second, cos 16 over 20. Hit enter. So the degrees is 36.9 degrees. All right, last but not least, let's look at this one. So I have a hypotenuse again. What is this side called? That would be my opposite. I do not have an adjacent. So which one is O and H? That would be sine. So sine x equals, make sure you put O on top of H, 4 over 5. What's the button you push if you don't know the angle? Push the second button, second sign, 4/5, hit enter, and it's 53.1 degrees. Okay, so that's trigonometry. I will do a couple different videos to kind of get you started on the worksheets.